Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pam Scott, and I am the Director of Client Services with Oasis Solutions. And I will be doing the presentation today on Sage 100 Purchase Order Module, Tips and Tricks. During the presentation, you may have seen on the PowerPoint that was showing a little bit earlier, you will be muted during this presentation. However, you do have the ability to ask questions throughout the webinar today by using the question feature. So if you have a question, and I will stop periodically and open it up for questions, I will answer as many of those questions as I possibly can. I do not have a facilitator today that's able to review those questions for me, but I will get to as many of those as I can. And if there's not enough time to get to all of the questions today, I will follow up by email to each individual that has a question that remains unanswered. So everyone should be seeing my screen that is showing Sage 100. And for those of you that attended last month, we talked about the accounts payable module. And so purchase order and AP obviously integrate and tie with one another because your vendors and the vendor master file and all of that information is maintained in the accounts payable module, and then the purchase order module integrates with the AP. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So what we're going to talk about first is in the purchase order module, I'm going to take you into the setup, and we're going to look at some of the purchase order options. So there's a couple of things that I wanted to point out to you. And on the main tab, this very first item says days to retain completed purchase orders. And you can have up to 999 days in this field. And how this works is a purchase order in Sage is considered completed when it's been fully received, and if you've integrated and said that you want to post invoices to AP, then completed means fully received and fully invoiced. So that is what gives a PO the status of completed. So when you do period end processing in the purchase order module, it comes out and it looks to see how long you want to retain completed purchase orders. And if that PO was completed more than 999 days ago, then it's going to purge it from your history. If you never do period end processing in purchase order, then those completed POs are going to remain there for as long as, until you do close the purchase order module, or you do a manual purge, which we're going to talk about a little bit later in the presentation. Typically, we do want to retain those POs for a while in our history in case we have to go back and look up anything or try to remember, what type of blanket order we placed last year with a vendor. So again, make sure you're keeping it for a proper amount of time. And again, I would not keep it any less than a year, but keep it as long as you want. If you set it to 0 days, then the next time you do period end processing in PO, it is going to purge every completed PO you have, whether you completed it a year ago or you completed it yesterday. It's going to be removed from history, and there's no way to get that information back unless you restore. So there's not a way to recall those. So I wanted to point out that option to you. And also, I wanted to talk about automatically close partially received purchase orders. And if you have that box checked, it opens up the field below it to provide kind of a receipt variance that's acceptable. This scenario would be applicable to, let's say that you purchased tankers full of a liquid or you purchase something by the pound, and you know you're going to get a semi-load, and typically that semi-load is 15,000 pounds, but maybe on a particular shipment you get 14,900 pounds. Well, you know they're not going to send that extra 100 pounds separately, so you can choose to to close a PO if it has not been fully received at 100%. If you do where you're ordering 15 widgets, then you normally would not have that option set, because if you've ordered 15 widgets, then you're going to expect to receive 15 widgets. It's more of unique circumstances where you're ordering very large quantities that maybe is not a unit of measure of each, but more of a pound or ounce or something like that, or ton. So you also have that option. And then I wanted to talk to you about the option below where it says post accounts payable invoices. And what this is saying, if the box is checked, is that when you do a purchase order and you receive the goods in, you know that you're going to get an invoice for that purchase, and you're going to enter the invoice in through the purchase order module, which is then going to have it flow to the accounts payable module. If this is not checked, then all you would be able to do in PO is a receipt of goods, and you would do your invoice in the AP module. And most individuals do choose to post their AP invoices to do that receipt of invoice in the purchase order module, and we'll talk about that process a little bit later in the presentation. And so it's real important to make sure that you know whether or not you're doing this, because that is probably the biggest reason where POs never get complete, is that this box is checked and someone gets an invoice and accidentally does the invoice data entry within the accounts payable module versus PO, so that PO remains open because it's not recognizing that it's been invoiced. So again, I'll show you those screens and we'll get into that detail a little bit later. So I'm going to just, if you have any questions about that, go ahead and enter those in. And we're going to move to the third tab for the setup options, which is the Generate tab. And I wanted to show you, this feature was added a couple of versions ago, but this allows you to combine sales orders by vendor, meaning if you have multiple sales orders and you're generating purchase orders from those sales orders, and you have vendors assigned to those items, you can tell it, if I have 15 sales orders to different customers for widgets that I need to order, it can combine all of those into one purchase order instead of having to do a single purchase order against every sales order. So hopefully that makes sense. As I recall, there used to be an add-on that you had to purchase in order to have this functionality, but this is now built into the system. So I wanted to point that out to you. And then we're going to move down to the 7th tab, which is our history. And I want to talk about the first 3 items that are listed here. And this is asking if you want to retain purchase order history. And again, I feel like if you want to, anywhere you can retain history, you should, because you always have utilities and the ability to purge out history by date. So I think you would want that checked. And then it's asking if you want to retain deleted orders or deleted lines off of a particular purchase order. So let's say that you issue a purchase order to Oasis for an additional Sage user license. And you issue that PO, and after you've created that PO, you realize that you miscalculated and you really do not need that additional license. So you haven't formally ordered it yet, so you just want to go in and delete that purchase order out of your system. This is asking, do you want to keep that in your history showing that a PO was created, but that it was subsequently deleted. And you can say yes to have it retain it. You can say no where it will not retain it. Or you can say prompt, which allows you to have another table that gives reasons why it was deleted. So it's going to prompt you for saying why you deleted that PO. Decided you didn't need it, issued the PO to the wrong vendor, something of that nature. You have the same option for deleting lines. So let's say you issue a purchase order with Oasis, and line 1 is to buy an additional Sage user license, and line 2 is to buy an additional BizNet user license, and you realize that you do not need the BizNet license, so you just want to remove that one line from the purchase order. This is asking if you want to retain that within the history, showing that line item listed there, but that it was deleted. It's retaining that information is helpful with an audit trail, and also helpful for maybe finding yourself in the unfortunate situation that someone in purchasing is adding items and purchasing things for themselves and issuing those POs and then deleting them, and then there's really no history of that. So you might want to think about that and determine if that's something that you want to track. So again, all of that is within the purchase order options. So I'll just ask that if you do have any questions about anything that we've talked about in the PO options, to go ahead and submit your questions, and I'll just take a quick look to see if we have anything, and I'm not seeing anything at the moment. So we're going to go ahead and move into a couple of different areas within purchase order. So now within the purchase order, I'm going to go to the main folder, and you have an option called Auto Reorder Selection. And what that auto reorder selection will do is, if you have on your inventory items, if you're using the inventory master file or maintenance, what it will do is if you have vendors assigned to those items that you purchase from, and you have reorder quantities listed, then what it will do is it will actually go in and you can run this order selection, which I'm going to do so you can kind of see with the report that you get. You can say whether you want to do it for all types, you just want it to look at raw materials, discontinued kits, or finished goods. You can select it by just a product line, a particular warehouse. You can do it for particular inventory items or for select vendors. For this purpose, I'm just going to select all of them. And you'll notice when it made a selection, my clear button is now in black. So that's kind of my first key that it actually made a selection. To see what it's recommending that I reorder, I'm going to preview my selection report. And let me make this a little larger for you. So now what it's doing is it's showing me by vendor, it's showing me the item, and it's showing me the warehouse, since I included all warehouses. So it's showing me the quantity that I currently have on hand in each warehouse, how many already exist on a purchase order that hasn't been received, how many are on an existing sales order, how many that I have are on back order, and then how many are available. The reorder point and the minimum order and the economic order, as well as the maximum on hand, those are all pulled from your setup in inventory maintenance on an item-by-item basis where you set those up. And then it gives you a recommended reorder. So, and then it also is pulling your cost or your estimated cost that it's pulling from inventory as well. So it's giving me this entire list, and it may be several pages long. So I'm going to exit out of this report. And then what it's going to do is it says, do you want to generate these orders? So my only option is yes or no. If I see items on that report that I don't want to reorder, then my only option, the easiest option is I have to generate the order and then I would go in and delete it. Or if it says the recommended reorder quantity is 20, but I really only want 10, I would create that PO, and then I would have to go in and manually change the quantity from 20 to 10. So if I said yes to this, what the system is basically doing is creating every single one of those POs, and they would show up in my purchase order entry, and then I could go directly to printing or emailing those out to my vendors. So I'm just going to say no to this, but that's how that auto reorder works. I'm going to go back into the screen, and I'm going to show you how the clear button is still in black. So if you ever open your auto reorder selection screen and see that this is not grayed out, that's your indication that someone has made a selection prior to you, or you made a selection and have forgotten about it, and they're all going to be included. So what I would do is clear that selection, and you'll notice how it's grayed out, and then I would redo my selection and start over. Once you have created those POs, there's no way to clear this selection out. You literally are going to have to go into purchase order entry and delete and or modify each of those purchase orders. So does anyone have a question about that? There's one point, that I want to make about that reorder selection. It's taking a look at, if there's a vendor assigned to your item. If there's not a vendor assigned to the item, then it doesn't know who to issue the PO to, so that part's not going to work. But you have your minimums and your maximums and all of that set up in your system. If you have set an inventory item up to inactive, this reorder selection report does not take that into consideration. So if you have a vendor set up and minimums and maximums and it falls into the reorder status, then it's going to put it on that report regardless of whether or not you have an item in inventory set to inactive. So if you're using this functionality and have your minimums and maximums set up in your reorder points, and you make an item inactive, you should go in and remove the reorder point and min and max information and zero that out, and also remove any vendors associated with it, so it does not automatically put it on that report. So does anyone have any questions about the reorder selection? Okay. If you do, it's not too late to go ahead and add those in, but wanted to show you that feature. And then also you have the auto generate from sales order. So some companies have items that they just do not stock. Or you may be a business where you physically do not have a warehouse. You have a product line that you sell, but when a customer places the order, you literally turn around and order that from your vendor. And your vendor may drop ship it to your customer, or your vendor may send it to you, and then you in turn send it to your customer. So you have the ability to auto-generate purchase orders directly from sales order. So you have quite a selection screen here, but you also do have the ability to create those POs from sales orders. So I did want to point that out to you. And some of these features, if you've never used them and you're not quite sure if it would work for you or not, most everyone has a test company or a play company set up in their Sage. So go into that test company and play around with it. Do different scenarios, see what you get, see what works, see what information may need to be corrected or appended within your live company, so that that functionality will work for you should you just decide to use it. Okay? All right. So now we're going to start talking about purchase order entry. And the purpose of talking about purchase order entry today is that I want to show you the different types of purchase orders that you can issue. So I'm going to just do a random one right now, and I'm just going to call it Pam. And what I want to show you is when you do a purchase order entry, you have order type. And you have various different types of orders. You have a standard order, which is probably what is used most of the time. You have drop ship orders. If you have a drop ship, that means in Sage terms is that the item is going to be ordered from your vendor, and your vendor is going to ship it directly to your customer. This is very important to remember how this works if you use inventory management. If you issue a PO for an item and say that it's drop shipped, then Sage is going to assume that you are never going to do a receipt of goods for that item because it's a drop ship and it's never going to come into your inventory. The opposite side of that is when you do a sales order to your customer, you need to make sure that the sales order is also set to drop ship. So if you ever have a drop ship order from a customer and you're using the purchase order module, that PO should also indicate a drop ship. And the reason for that is if the if the sales order is a drop ship, when you invoice your customer, it is not going to decrease your quantity out of inventory. When you do a drop ship on the purchase order side, it is not going to increase or put that item into your inventory. So if you're not consistent with both your sales order, invoice, and your PO saying that it's drop ship, then you can have incorrect inventory because it may be removing it from inventory and or adding it when there should have been no activity to your inventory at all. So hopefully that makes sense in the importance of making sure there's consistency with those drop ships. But that's how Sage makes that determination, is that if anything has a type of drop ship, that it is never going to come into your inventory and it's never going to come out of your inventory. Then you have master order, and we're going to see some examples of these. I have created some examples to show you how they work. A master order is what some people may call like a blanket order. A master order would be, let's say that at the beginning of the year, you contact your vendor and you say, you know what, I think over the next 12 months, I can sell 15,000 widgets. I can't order 15,000 widgets today, but I can, what kind of price break can you give me if I order 15,000 over the course of the next 12 months? So let's say that your vendor says, okay, if you do 15,000, there'll be $1 a piece. So you would issue a master order for 15,000 widgets, and then you would issue standard orders against that when you were ready to actually have them ship some of them to you. So that would be a master order. A repeating order is more of something that you're going to receive more consistently and probably the same quantities. So if I step back to the master order for a minute, let's say, again, I'm going back to the 15,000 widgets. Let's say that your business fluctuates during the year. So maybe in January and February, you're only going to order 500 widgets. But then when you get into March, you may want to order 3,000 of those. So it keeps track, whoops, excuse me. So it keeps track of the how many you have on the master order versus how many POs you've issued against that master. The repeating would be more of, I think I'm going to sell 1,000 widgets a month and I want to order 1,000 widgets a month, and that would be more of a repeating type order. And I'll give you, as we get in and take a look at these, I'm going to give you a couple of other examples of how a repeating order might be helpful to you, because you can almost use them as a template as well. So I created a couple of orders earlier. So let's take a look at the standard order first. And when you have a standard order, you're going to, obviously select your vendor. If you have a required date that you need that merchandise to come in, you can set that date, and you have reports within Sage so that you can know when things are required and follow up and make sure that they are received. And then on the Lines tab, this is where you're going to be putting in your line items. And so this is kind of just a one-off purchase order. Once I have completed the purchase order, I go to my Totals tab. It's going to break down based on my setup of either inventory items or miscellaneous items that I have set up in Sage. And it's going to track my taxable purchases versus non-taxable. And it's going to show all of that information. If you notice on the header tab, my purchase order status is new. Once I print my purchase order, even if it's just printing it to a PDF, that's what changes my purchase order from new to open. So that's what changes that status automatically for you. Is once you print the PO, then it changes that to open. So the next item that we're going to look at is, this is a master order that I created. So on this master order, I'm saying that, these are the items that I'm going to order over the next year. I've committed to them. I've been given a price break. I even added a comment line that is for my purposes and or theirs of purchasing one each month per year for a year. And so you'll notice that this says that it's a master order, and this field that you normally see to the right is blanked out. If we look at a repeating order, which should be my next one, it basically is almost the exact same layout, but this is something that I might be ordering once a week or once a month. What I wanted to show you is that some clients have vendors that they may purchase, one of 150 items a month from a particular vendor. So what you could do is you could set up like a template in here with all of those items. You could even leave the quantity ordered at 0. And then you could issue a PO off of this repeating order and then fill in the quantities that you want on the applicable lines. And I'll give you an example of that in just a minute on how that might work for you. So again, you're seeing the totals tab that gives you your taxable and non-taxable. You can add freight in here if you need to. And then you'll notice these fields are blank at the moment, but it gives you the last PO number and the last order date. So once I start issuing purchase orders against this repeating order, it's going to track that for me, okay? So the first scenario is let's issue a PO against that repeating order. So I'm going to go into purchase order entry. I'm going to give it my next PO number. I'm going to say that this is a standard order. In this field, notice how it added this field. If it's a standard order, I'm going to reference my repeating order here. Okay? And just to show you where this says master or repeating order and I do a lookup, it's going to list any that I have in my system. And the order type M stands for master and R is for repeating. So I want to use my repeating order WebR. So I'm going to select it. It's going to fill in the blanks for me, pulling from the repeating order. I'm going to change this to non-taxable for demo purposes so it doesn't error out on me since I don't have my tax schedule set up. I'm going to go to my lines tab, and it automatically filled in the quantities that were on my repeating order. So if I had a template that all said 0, then I could go into each item and I could change it to whatever quantity I'm ordering. And if there was a line item I didn't want to include, I could actually click on that line item and delete it. So literally I can delete it. If I don't want this leather dashboard, I can delete it. From the standard PO, it does not affect my repeating purchase order whatsoever. And let's say that on this first item, I actually only need 5 this month. So I can change that quantity to 5. I'm going to go through and I'm going to just preview this real quick. And I may have a ton of them out here that haven't been, whoops. That haven't been printed in my demo data. Sorry about that. And I believe it is, I should have paid attention to that PO number, huh? I think it's this one. Nope. Okay. Bear with me. Sorry about that. Should have made better choices when I was writing down the PO number. Okay, so there's my PO. It's showing that I removed that third line. It's showing that I changed that top quantity to 5. So if I go back now and I look at my original repeating order, when I go to the lines tab, you're going to see that it did, obviously my third line is still there and my original quantity is there. If I go to my totals tab, it's actually going to show me the last PO that was issued against it and the date. So it doesn't give you a list here, but if next month when I issue a PO against it, it'll fill in that information. So that's what it tracks when you have a repeating order. When you're issuing a PO against a master order, oops, and I'm going to use this master order. I'm going to change my tax schedule. When I go to my lines tab, this is filling in the total quantity from my master order, but again, I only want 1 a month, so I'm going to change those quantities. And I'm going to go ahead and I could, if I need to add an additional comment line to this, and say this is my April commitment, master order web in. Then I'm going to, I can print that PO. So you'll see the quantities. You'll see how that it added my comment line. I could have actually removed that comment line that was on the master order if I wanted to. And now if I go back in and look at my master order, and I go to my totals tab, it again shows me the last time that I issued a purchase order against it. And if I go to the lines tab, it has a column that says balance. So it shows that my original master order is for a quantity of 12, and I have 11 left remaining that I have not issued a PO against. So it keeps track of that for me. You can, when you auto-generate purchase orders, you can tell it to, auto-generate based on master or repeating orders as well. So again, I wanted to show you the how the difference between the master orders and the repeating orders. And then the third thing that is listed on here, or actually the fourth, bear with me, it's being a little slow at the moment, is that we also have an option for material requisition. And a material requisition, you'll notice when I change it, it substantially changes. There's no vendor associated with it and so forth. This is more of if your company maybe has like a central supply department, and I have to request if I want a case of copy paper for the accounting department, you can use material requisitions kind of as an internal requisition to request items that you need. So I have never found many people that use that material requisition, but it does help you with, keeping track of things going on that maybe are used for internal purposes if you inventory those items, and most folks don't inventory them. So I'm going to open up now and ask if anyone has any questions about either standard or master or repeating orders, or if they have any questions about drop ships. So I'm not seeing anything yet, so no questions. Let me double check. Nope, I'm not seeing anything. So again, if you think of something after the fact, please let me know. And the kind of the last topic we're going to talk about today is it always seems like we have old POs in the system that you're never going to receive. You accidentally did the invoice in AP versus purchase order, and they've been hanging out there forever. I mean, sometimes they're several years old, and you just want to get rid of them. So when you run into that situation, the first thing that you want to determine is what POs are out there showing open, and why are they open? Why does the system think that they are still open? And what you would want to do is under purchase order, you would come into period end, and you would go into the purchases clearing report. And this purchases clearing report is going to show me all the purchase orders that I have in my system that are open and why they are still open. So you'll notice this first PO is that I had ordered a quantity of 100, I've received only 99, and actually the quantity invoiced is a -1. So it looks like I or someone has messed something up on that one. Here's another one where, or actually, that's kind of, excuse me, I misspoke. That's kind of showing me, bear with me just a second. No, there is something that someone that in the demo data that's a little wonky there. This PO, we ordered 66, we've received 50, and we haven't done an invoice against any of them. So again, as I stated earlier, a purchase order is considered complete if it has been fully invoiced and fully received. So when all of those columns match, that's when that is going to come off of your purchases clearing report. And purchases clearing, you have a kind of a wash account in your general ledger, because when you're doing your setups in Sage, you have to give it a GL account number that you use for purchases clearing. And basically, when you do a receipt of goods, there's going to be an entry to your inventory, and the offset of that to your purchases clearing. And then when you're doing the receipt of invoice, it's going to hit your AP, and then it's going to come out of purchases clearing. So theoretically, your purchases clearing should always be a wash and should tie to the general ledger based on the total of this report. Now, chances of it doing that are probably slim unless you are very diligent about reconciling this once a month. So when you go through this report and you determine, maybe there's an item that you, I don't see a really good example on here. So let's say that, actually this would be a good example. Let's say you ordered 2, you've received 2 in, but somebody accidentally did invoice data entry in AP, and they've already paid the invoice, so you're never going to do a receipt of invoice through the purchase order module. So you really want that PO to be considered complete. There are various ways that you can fix purchase orders, and we can't go through all of those today. How you fix it depends on whether it has a back order status, if it's just extremely old. So a variety of actions have to take place. I know I'm being pretty vague with that. If you're interested in getting some instructions or an outline on how to determine the proper way to get rid of a purchase order, if you'll send me an email at pam@oasisky.com, I can send you that information. Now, if you run into a situation where you have POs out here, I've connected to customers and found that they might have 15 pages of POs that are 15 years old, and it's really not worth the time of figuring out exactly why they're still there, going in and fixing them one by one. So what you can do is, under the Utilities section in Sage, you can purge purchase orders, meaning it removes them from history. And you can purge completed POs. And if you remember in the very beginning of this session, when we talked about our PO options in the setup, we were saving those completed POs for 999 days. Let's say that you aren't ready to do a period in processing, but you realize you really only want to keep them for a year. You could go through and do purge completed POs, and it's going to actually ask you for, just a second, close 999 days prior to a certain date. Or if I just wanted to keep a year, I could go in and change this option to 365 and accept it. And when I come back in to purge my completed POs, it's going to say keep them for 365 days from whatever date I identify right here. So here's the thing to remember. Number one, before you go in to the utilities to do any of these purges, make sure you have researched very well exactly what you want to do. I would make sure that you have a good backup, because if you accidentally purged things you did not intend to, there is no functionality to unpurge them. That would be restoring from backup. So just make sure that you're being very diligent in determining what needs to be done and doing it correctly. With that being said, in your security in Sage and in the role maintenance, you're going to want to limit who has access to these utilities, because someone may go in accidentally and purge something unintentionally, and then you're going to be losing history. So you do want to make sure that only certain folks have access to those utilities basically throughout your system. So this is purging out completed POs. And what that means is it's not looking at POs that have a backorder status, a status of open. It has a status of completed. If you have a bunch of POs from 10 years ago, some are on backorder, some are open, some are completed, you can do purge obsolete POs and do an on or before date, and then it actually will go in and purge any of those purchase orders regardless of the status based on this date. So you have various things in here. You can purge your PO history. You can purge your receipt history. You can purge your purchases history by item and vendor, and you can also create purchase order history from prior settings within your system. Excuse me. There was something I wanted to add, and bear with me. I'm trying to remember what it was about. Oh, I know what I was going to say. We talked about how that when you just do a purchase order entry, there's no effect whatsoever on your general ledger, but it starts hitting your GL when you're doing receipt of goods and or receipt of invoice, and that's when things are hitting that purchases clearing account. So even though you're clearing up all of these POs and you're removing them, it is not going to have any impact whatsoever on your general ledger. So once you have cleaned things up, then you are going to need to do, if you want your purchases clearing total to match your general ledger, you're going to have to go in and do a journal entry to make those changes. So again, this is going to affect what's in the PO module. It is not going to have any impact whatsoever on the general ledger. So I will open up and see if anyone has any questions about that. A lot of times people just really want kind of one-on-one advice. If you've never run that purchases clearing report, or maybe you're new to your company and you didn't even know there was a purchases clearing report there, and you go out and take a look at it and it's massive, and you want assistance on how to methodically go through and figure out what needs to be removed and how to do it, and want our assistance, just give our help desk a call, and one of our consultants will be more than glad to help you walk through that process and advise you and provide you with the specific instructions that you need in order to complete that function. So that pretty much completes what we were going to talk about related to the purchase order module today. Wanted to just let everyone know a couple of things very quickly. Our next webinar, and you will be receiving an email invite, is going to be on Wednesday, May the 8th. And we will be focusing on accounts receivable that day. Also, you may have noticed in the opening presentation that we have scheduled our annual Sage 100 user group meeting. and it is going to be on June the 27th in the morning from 8:30 until noon. There will be an email going out to everyone next week where you can pre-register for that. So go ahead and mark it on your calendar to save the date. We're going to have a lot of good topics, some guest speakers. And it will be in the same location as last year at the Shelby campus on Shelbyville Road. So I'm not seeing any additional questions. So let me take a look at one more thing. And again, I'm not seeing any questions at all. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. You will receive a follow-up email probably within the next couple of days that will have a link to the recording of this. So feel free to go back and listen again if you want to, or if you have coworkers that maybe you feel would benefit from seeing this webinar, share that link with them. There's no cost, and it will take them right out to our website, and they can play this webinar or any of our prior webinars. All of those recordings are also on our website, so please feel free to check those out. I want to thank everyone for their time today, and if after the fact you think of any questions that you should have asked, please email Pam at oasisky.com, and I will do my best to answer those questions. If you are in need of assistance and would like to work with one of our consultants to clean up purchase order, feel free to email me and I will have someone give you a call back. So thank you everyone for your time today, and this ends our session. Thank you.